a single thread could feed an empire, or pull it apart. In medieval Persia, when silk lost its worth, looms fell silent, markets emptied, and merchants vanished into debt. The economy that once shimmered like desert gold began to fade, leaving behind hollow streets, calloused hands, and treasures turned to dust. This is the story of how one fragile fibre unravelled the fate of an entire civilization, and how resilience was spun from ruin. From the 9th to the 12th century, Persia stood at the heart of the world's silk trade, a glittering bridge between East and West. Cities such as Nishapur, Yazd, and Ray thrived as centres of weaving and dyeing, where every thread carried both art and status. Persian silk was not only smooth and luminous but also durable, admired across Byzantium, Egypt, and China. Merchants travelled with caravans heavy with bolts of fabric, crossing deserts and mountains under the watch of stars. Along the Silk Road, their goods were worth more than gold and could be exchanged for horses, spices, or even weapons. In royal courts, Persian silk was a sign of prestige. Kings wrapped their authority in it, and brides were adorned with its glow. In these centuries, looms never slept. The rhythm of the shuttle became the pulse of Persian life. Every spool of silk, every cocoon represented both wealth and beauty. The prosperity reached from palace to village, from mulberry farmers and silkworm keepers to dyers, weavers, and traders. Persia's silk was more than an export. It was identity. It embodied refinement, patience, and the harmony between nature and craftsmanship. For a moment in history, the empire's fortune hung on a thread that glimmered in every corner of its vast land. Silk was not just fabric in medieval Persia, it was the breath of its economy. Behind every roll of cloth stood an entire network of human labour. Farmers cultivating mulberry trees, women tending to silkworms in warm clay houses, artisans spinning and dyeing under faint lamplight. Each family depended on the next, creating a living chain of survival bound by the same shimmering thread. A single village could live entirely off silk. In Yazd, it was said that even the air smelled faintly of boiled cocoons. Silk determined dowries, debts, and dreams. It circulated like currency, as stable and symbolic as gold in Europe. To own silk was to hold power. To sell it was to feed generations. The Persians saw silk as divine craft, a gift of the silkworm nurtured by patience and precision. Traders praised it as soft fire, a fabric that captured the light of paradise. It wasn't merely worn, it was inherited, cherished, and offered in prayer. Thus, silk became the invisible spine of Persian civilization, connecting distant regions, sustaining its artisans, and enriching its rulers. Its golden thread wove together both economy and emotion, reminding every Persian that beauty itself could be an engine of life. By the 13th century, the golden thread of Persia began to fray. Civil wars, shifting dynasties, and relentless raids turned the once bustling Silk Road into a perilous wasteland. Bandits plundered caravans, and local rulers imposed heavy tolls, strangling trade routes that had long sustained Persia's prosperity. When the Mongol armies swept across Asia, they burned cities like Nishapur and Ray to ash. Workshops, looms, and centuries of craftsmanship vanished overnight. Trade that had once carried Persian silk across the world now slowed to a whisper. Merchants who survived the invasions found themselves stranded with no markets, no buyers, and no roads safe enough to travel. At the same time, maritime routes through the Indian Ocean and the Black Sea began to dominate commerce, drawing wealth toward new coastal powers. The value of Persian silk plummeted. Where once a bolt of fabric could buy a warhorse, now it could barely cover a family's needs. Markets that had once overflowed with colours now stood empty, the looms silent, their threads gathering dust. In chronicles of the time, one merchant lamented, "The wind still crosses the desert, but it carries no trade, only the ghosts of our fortune." The fall of the silk market marked not only the loss of wealth, but the unravelling of Persia's role in the global tapestry it once helped weave. As Persia struggled, new rivals rose. China and India, already rich in silk traditions, began producing cloth at a scale Persia could no longer match. Their goods were cheaper, their trade routes safer, and European merchants, especially those from Venice and Genoa, turned their sails toward these new eastern shores. Persian silk, once called soft gold, became a relic of a fading age. European buyers preferred the vibrant brocades of Bengal or the polished silks of Hangzhou. Persian traders watched helplessly as ships replaced caravans, and the sea routes eclipsed the desert roads that had once defined their empire's identity. Within a few decades, the price of silk in Persian markets fell by half. Weavers who had devoted their lives to perfecting the art now faced ruin. The decline was not merely economic, it was spiritual. Silk had been Persia's pride, the proof that beauty could be woven by human hands. Now that pride was exported elsewhere. Yet even as foreign silks flooded bazaars, a quiet resistance lingered. In hidden workshops, old craftsmen continued to weave, not for profit, but for memory, as if by spinning the old patterns, they could still bind their heritage to the fabric of time. The first victims of Persia's silk collapse were the weavers. In Yazd and Isfahan, once alive with the rhythmic clatter of looms, workshops fell into silence. Families who had spent generations perfecting the art of weaving found their doors shuttered, their hands idle. The hum of industry that had once echoed through narrow alleys was replaced by the quiet despair of hunger. Master weavers, once commissioned by nobles and sultans, now returned to the soil. They traded the softness of silk for the roughness of ploughs. The thread has not broken, one chronicler wrote, but the hands that guided it have grown weary. Many artisans refused to abandon their craft entirely. They wove coarse cloth from wool or cotton, clinging to the remnants of their lost art. In the markets, unsold rolls of silk gathered dust. The scent of dyes, once sharp and vibrant, faded from the air. Young apprentices left for distant towns or joined the army, leaving behind an aging generation of craftsmen who watched their looms decay. What had once been a source of pride became a symbol of grief. For these artisans, unemployment was not just the loss of income, but the death of identity. Their silence marked the end of a golden rhythm that had defined Persian cities for centuries. The fall of silk shattered not only the craftsmen, but also the merchants who once carried their work across continents. Wealthy traders who had built empires from caravans of shimmering fabric now faced bankruptcy. Warehouses stood full of goods no one could afford. Caravans disbanded. Camels were sold for scraps. The golden coins of Nishapur turned into worthless bolts of unsold silk. Some merchants attempted to shift their trade toward spices or ceramics, but the networks they had relied upon were gone. Credit collapsed, debts mounted, and reputations dissolved. Once proud families, whose lineage was tied to the trade of silk, found themselves begging for safe passage to border towns or taking up smaller trades along the fringes of the empire. In the chronicles of the age, travellers describe ghostly trading routes where only the wind moved. Caravans that once glittered with Persian goods were replaced by silence and sand. Even the camels that survived seemed to carry memories of vanished wealth, their bells rusted, their shadows long. The collapse of the merchant class marked the hollowing of Persia's middle order, the bridge between artisans and rulers. With it went the confidence of an entire nation. The fall of silk was no longer an economic shift. It was the unravelling of Persia's social fabric itself. When the silk market collapsed, its echo reached even the smallest villages. Farmers who had long cultivated mulberry groves found no buyers for their leaves. What once symbolised prosperity now rotted in the fields. The silkworm keepers, who tended to the delicate insects like newborns, abandoned their trays. Without buyers, they starved, and so did their worms. Entire communities that had thrived on the rhythm of the silk cycle began to wither. Villages that once hummed with the gentle chatter of women reeling silk now fell silent. Mulberry trees were cut down for firewood, their roots scorched as families searched for warmth instead of income. The fields that once gleamed with silk cocoons turned barren, haunted by the memory of what they once produced. As the economy of silk vanished, rural Persia slid into poverty. Tax collectors, unwilling to lose revenue, continued to demand payments from peasants who no longer had goods to sell. To survive, some migrated toward the cities, while others fell into debt and servitude. For the peasants, the loss was not measured in coins but in meaning. Their labour, once part of something grand and beautiful, became invisible. The threads that had bound them to the empire's prosperity were cut, leaving only silence, dust, and the quiet dignity of endurance. Facing widespread decline, Persian rulers tried desperately to restore what had been lost. Some dynasties reduced taxes and offered incentives to revive trade along the old Silk Road. Others encouraged the development of luxury crafts such as carpets, ceramics, and metalwork, hoping to attract new markets. Yet no decree could reverse the tide of global change. The world's commerce had shifted toward the seas, beyond the reach of Persia's caravans and deserts. Venetian and Genoese merchants no longer looked eastward for silk but southward toward India and China. The great cities that once pulsed with trade, Nishapur, Isfahan, Yazd, struggled to recover their former brilliance. Still, the Persian spirit of craftsmanship endured. In royal courts, artisans experimented with new materials. In villages, weavers adapted to wool and cotton. Silk's fall became both tragedy and teacher, a reminder that beauty could survive transformation. Chroniclers of the era spoke of kings who tried to weave new fortunes from old threads. Yet the effort was too late. The empire's wealth had moved elsewhere, and its looms no longer echoed through the night. Still, in every attempt to rebuild, there lingered a quiet resilience, a belief that artistry, though wounded, could one day return in another form. From the ashes of the silk industry, new forms of art began to rise. As the looms fell silent, Persian weavers turned to wool, creating carpets whose intricate designs carried echoes of the lost silk patterns. The famous Persian rug, dense, colourful, and filled with geometric poetry, was not merely an invention of prosperity but a child of necessity. It was born from the same patience, precision, and devotion that once wove the empire's finest silks. The dye houses that once coloured silk now tinted wool and cotton. The artisans learned to turn scarcity into beauty, crafting designs that reflected not opulence but endurance. Each thread of a Persian carpet carried a memory of vanished markets, ruined looms, and yet the unbroken will of its people. In cities like Kashan and Tabriz, the craft of carpet weaving flourished. Its global fame would later eclipse the memory of silk itself, proving that creativity could survive even economic ruin. What was once luxury for kings became a new foundation for national pride. The Persians had transformed loss into legacy. By replacing silk with wool, they did not abandon their identity, they redefined it. Every carpet laid upon the floors of mosques and palaces whispered the same quiet truth. Art never dies. It only changes its texture. When silk lost its value, Persia lost its golden thread, but not its soul. The fall of its shimmering empire was not the end, but a metamorphosis. The weavers who once clothed kings learned to weave endurance instead. Their hands, though poorer, still moved with purpose. Their eyes still sought beauty in every fibre. In the silence that followed the collapse, Persia rediscovered itself. It learned that labour could outlast fortune, and that artistry, though humbled, was eternal. The story of silk's decline is not one of ruin alone, but of resilience, of how people continue to create even when their world unravels. The Persian artisans turned disaster into devotion, poverty into poetry. They taught that even when gold fades and trade shifts, the heart that creates never truly dies. For in Persia, even a broken thread could still hold the strength to bind generations, a reminder that beauty woven from struggle is the most enduring fabric of all.